The most persistent myth surrounding Logan insists the picture succeeds because it abandons superhero conventions for Western authenticity. Critics and audiences have celebrated how James Mangold transformed Wolverine from comic book champion into a gunslinger archetype. They praise the movie's supposed maturity and genre transcendence. This reading captures something genuine about the story's achievement, but it misses the more subversive operation at work. The protagonist doesn't simply borrow from Western legend, it turns that archetypal tradition into a trap, one that reveals how heroic figures can transform into prisons, not paths to redemption. The evidence builds from the picture's opening moments. Watch Wolverine struggle to defend his limousine from car thieves. Here's a man whose claws once symbolized primal power, now reduced to protecting corporate property for minimum wage. Mangold's camera lingers on the mutant's labored breathing, his visible pain. Notice how his healing factor betrays him with partial recovery. But this isn't just about aging. It's about how the Western champion's promise of eventual escape has curdled into permanent servitude. The gunslinger myth depends on the protagonist's ability to ride into the sunset once justice is served. Wolverine cannot ride anywhere. He has grown permanently embedded in the world his violence helped create. This entrapment intensifies when the narrative forces the protagonist into unwanted paternity through Laura and Xavier. Traditional Western stories resolve through the champion's strategic withdrawal. Shane walks away. The man with no name disappears. Even Clint Eastwood's aging gunfighters find ways to disengage. But the protagonist discovers he has created something that makes withdrawal impossible. A daughter who carries his genetic capacity for violence, and a father figure whose deteriorating mind has transformed into a weapon of mass destruction. The Westchester incident crystallizes this horror. Xavier's psychic seizure doesn't just paralyze a casino hotel. It demonstrates how the mentor's greatest strength has inverted into humanity's greatest threat. Laura represents the movie's most sophisticated insight into how heroic legend reproduces itself across generations. When she first appears, dismembering her captors, she fights with Wolverine's berserker rage, but none of his reluctance or moral complexity. She is pure inherited violence, the mutant's genetic legacy stripped of his hard-earned wisdom about restraint. The picture's genius lies in how it presents this inheritance as both the protagonist's greatest fear and his unavoidable responsibility. He cannot abandon her because she is literally him, the child he never wanted, carrying the violence he spent decades trying to contain. The X-24 encounter literalizes this thematic territory through direct confrontation. Wolverine must fight his younger, more violent clone, his own capacity for brutality made manifest and unleashed without conscience. This isn't metaphor disguised as an action sequence. It's the mutant battling the part of himself that Western archetypal tradition typically celebrates. The lone gunslinger's defining trait, his superior capacity for violence, transforms into the enemy he must destroy to protect the next generation. But destroying X-24 requires the protagonist to deploy the very violence he's trying to eliminate from his legacy. Mangold constructs this trap through systematic visual subversion of heroic iconography. The story's desaturated palette drains color from superhero spectacle, rendering Wolverine's world in the brown and gray tones of economic anxiety, not mythic adventure. When the mutant finally dons his classic yellow costume, pulled from comic books that exist within the picture's reality, the moment reads as tragic costume, not a champion's revelation. The legend has evolved into merchandise, stories told to children about a violence they don't understand. The movie's treatment of violence reinforces this deconstruction. Previous X-Men pictures choreographed Wolverine's combat as balletic spectacle, emphasizing his efficiency and control. This narrative strips away that aesthetic distance, showing violence as messy, consequence-heavy, and psychologically damaging. The protagonist's claws don't slice cleanly through problems. They tear flesh, cause lasting pain, and create more violence in response. When Laura fights, she doesn't display heroic restraint. She demonstrates how violence grows into a learned response passed from one generation to the next through proximity and necessity. Yet the story's final act reveals the fundamental impossibility of escaping this mythological trap. Wolverine's sacrifice at the picture's climax achieves exactly what he sought to avoid. It transforms him into the legendary figure that will inspire the next generation of mutant children. His death doesn't end the cycle of champion violence, it consecrates it. Laura and the other young mutants don't learn restraint from his example. They learn that violence in service of protection is noble, necessary, and ultimately transformative. This creates the movie's most honest and troubling insight. The Western archetype may be incompatible with genuine moral growth. The gunslinger's myth promises that violence can be contained, channeled, and eventually abandoned once justice is served. But this narrative suggests that violence creates the very conditions that demand more of it, and that heroic archetypes reproduce themselves not through conscious choice, but through structural necessity. The picture's commercial success, earning over $619 million worldwide, complicates this reading by demonstrating audiences' appetite for legend even when it's being deconstructed. We celebrate Wolverine's sacrifice while ignoring how that celebration perpetuates exactly the kind of champion worship the story critiques. The movie succeeds as entertainment by failing as an intervention. Logan achieves something rare in contemporary blockbuster filmmaking. It uses our massive cultural investment in these characters to examine how deeply embedded mythologies can turn into inescapable cycles instead of redemptive narratives. The picture doesn't transcend the superhero genre. It reveals how the genre's foundational assumptions about heroic violence might be fundamentally flawed. The protagonist cannot ride into the sunset, because there is no sunset, only the endless reproduction of the violence he hoped to escape. The gunslinger's paradox remains unresolved, because it may be unresolvable. Some archetypal traditions are stronger than the people trapped within them.